You're nothing but a burden. That's what my grandson shouted as he slammed the car door, leaving me in the middle of those mountains. Cold wind whipped through the trees. Gravel crunched under their tires as they drove away, their laughter spilling into the night. I tried to stand, but my leg gave out. Pain shot through my body like lightning. I'm Josephine Miller. Everyone just calls me Grandma Jo, 74 years old, widow. I raised 3 children alone, and then, when life brought them kids of their own, I helped again. Diapers, babysitting, scraped knees, late-night calls. I gave everything. And what I got in return was mockery, theft, and betrayal. The forest was black except for the pale moonlight seeping through the pines. My breath steamed in the air, sharp and quick. I could smell the faint trace of smoke clinging to my jacket, remnants from the shed they had torched earlier that week, just for fun. The shed where I kept tools, photo albums, even the rocking chair my husband built, gone. I remembered the way my granddaughter had tossed my wallet on the floor that morning, grinning as she pulled out my last 20. You don't need this. You'll be dead soon anyway. They thought it was hilarious. Every step in the woods was agony. My broken leg scraped against roots and stones. But the pain wasn't the worst part. It was the echo of their voices, burned into my skull, the curses. The way they spat my name like I was dirt. Branches snapped somewhere in the dark. For a moment I froze, heart hammering. Just a raccoon, probably. Still, the feeling stayed, that I wasn't just abandoned. I was being erased. I reached for a fallen branch to lean on, my hand trembling. The wood was slick with frost. My knuckles burned. Somewhere in the distance, headlights cut briefly across the ridgeline. Their car, speeding back to the lodge, no doubt to brag about how they ditched the old hag. That's what they called me, the old hag. I had raised them. I had let them live in my house rent-free, fed them when their parents couldn't. I even signed my name so they could use my health insurance when one of them needed treatment. They took and took until there was nothing left. Then they set fire to the scraps and left me to rot. Snowflakes drifted down, stinging as they landed on my cheeks. My hands were numb, my leg throbbing, my throat raw from screaming their names. They didn't care. They never turned back. I tried to calm my breathing. If I panicked, I'd freeze to death. And that's what they wanted. That much was clear. You won't make it through the night, my grandson had sneered as he tossed my cane out the window before driving off. His eyes, sharp and cruel, still burned in my memory. The woods were quiet now, except for the groan of trees in the wind. My vision blurred, but a thought kept me awake. They believed I was finished, that no one would ever hear my side of the story, that their little game would vanish like smoke. But I hadn't survived 74 winters by giving up. I hadn't buried a husband, paid off a mortgage on a waitress's salary, and raised 3 kids alone just to let a few ungrateful brats write my ending. Every bone in my body screamed in protest as I dragged myself across the frozen ground. My hands clawed at moss and soil. I could feel blood soaking through my stocking. Still, I kept going. At one point, I thought I heard laughter again, high-pitched, echoing through the trees. I jerked my head up, eyes wide. Nothing but the empty woods. My breath caught. Was it memory? Or were they watching just to see how long I lasted? I whispered into the cold air, voice shaking but steady enough. You think you've won. The moon slipped behind the clouds, and darkness wrapped around me like a coffin. My body was failing, but something inside me, older, sharper, was waking up. Revenge doesn't come from strength, it comes from resolve. And mine had just been carved out of pain and humiliation. I lay back against a tree, breath shallow, snow piling on my coat. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in my ears. Somewhere in the distance, A wolf howled. The sound didn't scare me, it steadied me. Because I wasn't going to die out here. Not tonight. Not like this. The forest smelled of pine and smoke, of endings and beginnings. My fingers closed around the jagged edge of a broken bottle half buried in the dirt. Trash left by some careless camper. But to me, it was a reminder. Even broken things can cut. "They'll regret this," I whispered, my lips numb, words nearly swallowed by the wind. And as the darkness closed in, I saw it clearly. Faces pressed against courtroom glass, reputations crumbling, laughter twisted into screams. They thought I was finished, but the night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. When I woke, pale morning light was dripping through the trees. My body ached, stiff as frozen wood. My leg throbbed so badly I thought I'd pass out. But I wasn't dead. Not yet. A bird's cry echoed overhead, sharp and startling. I blinked against the brightness, trying to gather myself. My coat was stiff with frost. My fingers were purple and cracked. Still, I could move them. That was enough. I clawed my way up against the tree trunk, forcing air into my lungs. The smell of pine resin and damp earth filled my nose. Each breath burned. I thought of my grandkids, those faces twisted with arrogance, spitting words they couldn't take back. "You're useless, Grandma. Just die already." I had heard it more than once, sometimes whispered under their breath, sometimes shouted to my face. This wasn't one cruel moment in the woods. It was years of building, drip by drip, insult by insult. I pulled myself forward, dragging my useless leg across the ground. The path was faint, half covered by fallen needles and last night's dusting of snow. But I knew the mountains well. My late husband and I used to camp here before the kids were even born. These trails had carried our laughter, our arguments, our quiet dinners cooked on open fire. That memory pushed me forward. My mind kept circling back to the shed, the flames licking at the walls, the smell of burning wood. I had stumbled out with a garden hose while they laughed, filming me with their phones like it was some joke. Insurance money, I thought bitterly. They probably hoped I'd file a claim, maybe even let them get their hands on whatever payout came. But then I remembered something they had overlooked. A small metal box I kept buried beneath the shed floorboards. Not money, not jewelry, something else. Something they didn't know existed. My pulse quickened. The forest opened slightly, revealing a thin ribbon of smoke rising in the distance. My heart stuttered. At first I thought it was them, coming back maybe to finish the job. But no. The smoke was steady, curling from a chimney. A cabin. Relief flooded me, followed by suspicion. Whoever lived there, would they help me or turn me away? In towns like these, favors always had strings. I crawled the last yards, each pull of my body carving pain into my chest. My knuckles were raw by the time I reached the clearing. The cabin stood squat and weathered, shutters hanging loose. An old truck sat out front, dusted with snow. I banged on the door with the last of my strength. The sound echoed hollow through the woods. For a long moment, nothing. Then footsteps inside. The door cracked open. A man's face appeared, lined and weathered like the wood of the cabin itself. His eyes narrowed when he saw me. Lord Almighty, what happened to you? I nearly collapsed in his doorway. He pulled me inside, muttering under his breath. The cabin smelled of coffee and wood smoke, warm and alive. A fire snapped in the hearth. My eyes stung with sudden tears. He set me in a chair, fetched a blanket, pressed a steaming mug into my hands. "Name's Frank," he said finally. "Been living out here 20 years. Who did this to you?" I hesitated. My lips were cracked, words heavy. But when I looked into that stranger's face, I saw no judgment, only a sharp, quiet patience. So I told him, not everything, just enough. That my grandchildren had left me behind, that they stole, that they cursed me like I was less than human. Frank's jaw tightened. Family, he muttered. They cut the deepest. I nodded. My hands shook around the mug. The heat seeped into my bones. For the first time since last night, I felt the faintest thread of safety. But then he asked something that made me pause. You said they stole your money. You ever check your accounts lately? My chest tightened. Why? He shrugged, poking at the fire. Just sounds like the kind of kids who wouldn't stop at cash. Maybe they dipped further, insurance, banking, loans. Folks out here, they know tricks. Easy to run things online if the account holder's old and doesn't keep close watch. The words hit me like another slap in the face. My mind spun. They had used my insurance before, signed my name without asking. What else had they done behind my back? I pulled the blanket tighter around me. My thoughts were racing faster than my pulse. What if Frank was right? That small metal box under the shed floorboards, it wasn't valuables in the usual sense. It was records, bank statements, receipts, passwords I had written down because my memory wasn't what it used to be. I had kept it hidden for years. My husband used to tease me, said I was paranoid. But now, maybe, that paranoia would save me. Frank studied me from across the firelight, his eyes steady. You don't have to tell me, he said, but I can see it plain as day. You're not the type to just lie down and take it. I let out a brittle laugh. I suppose not. Silence settled, broken only by the crackle of fire. My legs screamed every time I shifted, but the pain no longer drowned me. Something else was taking hold, a grim, icy clarity. If my grandkids had stolen more than I realized, I could prove it. That box might be ash now, but maybe not. And if it survived, so would I. I sipped the bitter coffee, my reflection warping in the tin mug. Their voices echoed again. You'll be gone soon, and everything you had will be ours. They thought my life was theirs to devour, but I wasn't gone, and the trail they left behind was wider than they knew. The fire popped loudly, sparks jumping. I stared into the flames, seeing their smug faces dissolve into ash. And in that moment, a plan began to take shape. Because I realized something chilling. The only way to beat them was to let them believe they'd already won. Frank let me stay the night. My leg was bound tight with an old splint, my body wrapped in blankets. The fire roared low, steady as a heartbeat. I didn't sleep much. My mind wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces again. My granddaughter's smirk as she pocketed my last dollar. My grandson's sneer as he called me useless. The shed collapsing in flames. The laughter in the woods. But woven into those images was something new. A box. Buried under the shed floor. The one thing they hadn't counted on. By dawn, I knew I had to find out. Frank didn't argue. If it matters that much to you, I'll drive you back, he said, keys jangling in his hand. The truck groaned as it started, headlights cutting through the fog that hung low between the pines. The road back to my property felt longer than I remembered. Every turn lined with icy branches that clawed at the windows like they wanted to pull me back. When we pulled up, my stomach turned. The shed was nothing but a blackened skeleton. The air still carried the sour tang of smoke. My house loomed behind it, quiet, blinds drawn. Their car wasn't there. Stay here, Frank said, stepping out first. He pushed aside charred boards until he found what I had prayed for. The ground beneath was scorched, but the metal box had survived. He carried it back, setting it in my lap, cold metal against my hands. I nearly cried. Inside, papers. Bank statements, account numbers, copies of insurance forms, old IDs, even a worn photo of my husband holding up a fish bigger than his chest. The smell of smoke clung to every page, but the words were legible, and what I saw made my blood run colder than the snow outside. Withdrawals I hadn't made, accounts I didn't recognize. Medical bills in my name that I had never approved. Thousands, tens of thousands bled from me over the last 2 years. They hadn't just stolen my wallet. They had gutted me, piece by piece, while I smiled and served them pie at Sunday dinner. I gripped the paper so hard my nails tore through it. Rage twisted my chest, but underneath it came something sharper. Focus. Frank peered over my shoulder, his brow furrowed. That's fraud, clear as day. Fraud. The word tasted good, like iron, like a weapon. I didn't need to swing fists or shout in their faces, no. I needed to show them what real power looked like. That night, when Frank drove me into town, I asked him to stop at the library. He gave me a curious look, but he didn't ask questions. Inside, I logged onto a public computer. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, flickering, making my reflection in the screen look like a ghost. I typed slowly, my fingers stiff, every keystroke echoing louder in my head. Account numbers, emails, passwords. They had been sloppy. They used my information but mixed it with their own. Their names showed up in billing addresses, their phone numbers tied to services. They thought I was too old, too simple to notice. But I noticed now, and I made my first move. I locked them out. Every account I could access, I changed the passwords. Banking, credit cards, insurance logins. I shut every door they had been slipping through. By the time I left, the night air was sharp with frost, my leg burning with pain. But I felt lighter, stronger, like I had reached into their pockets and pulled out their arrogance, tearing it to shreds. The first strike wasn't big, but it was loud enough, because within a day the calls started. Grandma, I can't get into my account. Did you change something? My grandson's voice cracked, high with panic. I let silence hang on the line, then whispered, "You should be more careful where you stick your hands." He started shouting, calling me names I won't repeat. I hung up before he finished. The next morning, it was my granddaughter, her voice sugar-sweet, dripping with fake concern. "Grandma, maybe the bank made a mistake. Can we just fix this?" I almost laughed. The audacity. "You'll get what's coming," I told her, cold as the snow outside. Then I ended the call. They were scrambling. I could hear it in every word, every nervous pitch of their voices. That night, Frank poured me coffee and said, "You rattled them." I nodded. It's only the beginning. Because cutting them off wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted them to sweat, to panic, to realize that their easy little game had cracks in it. And as I stared into the flames, I knew where the next crack would come from. The local bank manager still owed me a favor. Years back, when his father was dying, I'd cooked meals and delivered them every evening. People don't forget that kind of kindness, even if they pretend to, and I was about to remind him. The next morning, I dressed slowly, every movement stiff with pain. My leg throbbed, but I forced myself into my heaviest coat. Frank offered to drive again, but I shook my head. I need to do this alone. The cold hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. Snow had thickened overnight, layering the mountains in blinding white. The air was sharp, metallic, almost sweet. It smelled of wood smoke from the scattered houses down in town. I walked with my cane, each step deliberate. My grandchildren thought I was too old, too broken to make moves. But they didn't know how many strings I had tied over the years, how many debts of kindness still lingered in this valley. The bank was quiet when I entered, bells chiming on the door. Warm air rushed around me, smelling faintly of floor wax and ink. Behind the counter, a young teller glanced up and smiled politely, but when I asked for Mr. Harris, her face shifted with recognition. A few minutes later, he came out, taller now, heavier around the middle, but those same nervous eyes I remembered from when his father was in hospice. He froze when he saw me. "Mrs. Miller?" I nodded. "It's been a long time." He ushered me into his office. The blinds were drawn, casting stripes of light across the desk. Papers stacked high, computer screen glowing blue. He cleared his throat, uneasy. "I never got to thank you properly for what you did for my family." "You don't need to," I said, "but I do need a favor." He frowned, leaning forward. I slid the smoke-stained papers across his desk, his brow furrowed deeper with every page. Unauthorized withdrawals, loans, transactions under my name, but with my grandchildren's numbers attached. "That's fraud," he whispered. "I know." For a moment he seemed ready to help, but then his expression shifted, conflicted. He tapped his pen nervously. "Mrs. Miller, I have to be careful. These cases get messy. If I file an official report, your family will know it came from here. They might even—" He stopped. "Might even what?" I pressed. He swallowed. "They've already been in here, just this week, asking about your accounts." My chest tightened. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, but they were angry. They said you'd been confused lately, that you were giving them trouble." Confused. That was their game. To paint me as senile, to make sure no one believed me. I felt my throat burn, but I forced the anger down. I had to stay cold. "Do you believe that?" I asked quietly. Harris looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, I know better. But if they think you're turning against them, they won't sit quietly." I left the bank with more than I came in with. Copies. Harris had slipped them into a folder. Proof. Transactions marked, dates circled. Enough to raise eyebrows, if not yet a case. But the air felt heavier when I stepped outside. The snow was falling faster now, thick flakes blotting out the sky. As I reached the corner, I spotted something across the street. My grandson's car. Parked crooked, engine running, exhaust curling into the air. And him, leaning against the hood, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. For a second, I thought my heart stopped. Then he smirked. I tightened my grip on the folder. He didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, watching. When I turned down the street, I heard the car start, tires crunching behind me, slowly, deliberately, following. Panic surged, but I kept walking, head high. My breath steamed in the cold. My cane clicked on the icy sidewalk. His engine growled low, keeping pace. By the time I reached the library steps, he rolled down his window. "Going somewhere, Grandma?" His voice was a snake's hiss, full of fake sweetness. I didn't answer. I pushed through the doors, heat washing over me again, but it did nothing to stop the chill crawling through my bones. Inside, I sat at a computer, pretending to type while my hands shook. Out the window, his car idled, waiting. For the first time since the woods, I felt the edge of fear gnawing at me again. They knew. They were circling. My first strike had rattled them, but now they wanted to corner me. Frank's words echoed in my head. They won't sit quietly. The folder of proof lay heavy in my bag, like a weight and a weapon all at once. But how long could I keep it safe? The glass reflected my pale face, lined with years, hard with resolve. But my eyes, even they betrayed the flicker of doubt. Maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe I'd awakened something I couldn't control. And as I stared into that reflection, the thought came sharp and cold. What if this time I didn't make it out? Snow piled high against the windows that night, muffling the world into silence. I sat by Frank's fire, clutching the folder of bank records like it was the last solid thing in my life. The flames licked orange and gold, but no warmth reached me. Not after what I'd seen. That car. Those eyes. The way my grandson had leaned against the hood like a hunter, waiting for his prey. I told Frank everything, my voice low, steady, though my hands trembled around the mug of coffee he kept refilling. He frowned. "You can't stay here forever." "They know you're moving against them." "I know," I whispered. But what I didn't tell him was worse. Doubt. A sharp, ugly voice gnawing inside me. What if they're right? What if the world believes them? Senile, confused, unstable. The word stung more than any insult they'd ever thrown at me. I'd heard whispers before. A neighbor who once hinted I was forgetful. A doctor who suggested I shouldn't live alone. All it would take was a few more voices, and suddenly I'd be the problem, not them. The next day, that fear became flesh. A knock rattled Frank's cabin door at noon. He stiffened, eyes darting to me. When he opened it, 2 officers stood on the porch, snow dusting their shoulders. Their radios crackled faintly. "Good afternoon," one said, voice clipped. "We received a call about a welfare check. Reports that Mrs. Miller might be in distress, possibly confused, vulnerable." My heart stopped. Frank bristled. "She's fine. More than fine. Who filed that report?" "Family members," the officer said flatly. "They're concerned." Concerned. I almost laughed. My grandchildren wouldn't know concern if it bit them. I forced a polite smile, though my stomach churned. "I'm perfectly capable," I said, my voice steady. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The officers exchanged a glance. One scribbled something on a pad. Then, with a warning tone, he said, "Just keep in mind, if we get another call like this, the county might step in. Adult Protective Services. Could get messy." And just like that, they were gone, boots crunching through the snow. I sagged against the chair, fury boiling. This wasn't just petty theft anymore. They were rewriting my life, stripping my credibility before I could even fight back. "They're clever," Frank muttered darkly. "They're trying to box you in." And it was working. The next few days blurred. Phone calls I didn't answer, knocks on the door I didn't trust. My leg ached constantly, my strength faltered. Even Frank's presence couldn't keep the shadows from creeping in. One night, I woke to headlights cutting across the cabin walls. I held my breath, heart pounding. The light lingered, then vanished. No knock, no sound. Just silence pressing heavier than the snow outside. They wanted me rattled, and they were close to succeeding. The folder of proof sat heavy in my lap, but even it began to look thin. What if no one cared? What if it vanished in some drawer buried under excuses? What if my grandchildren really managed to paint me as a bitter, senile old woman with wild accusations? Doubt was a poison, and I was drinking it by the cupful. Frank noticed. "You're slipping," he said bluntly one morning. "That's what they want, to make you question yourself." I didn't answer. That afternoon, I tested my strength. I walked the cabin floor, cane clicking, every step forcing air into my lungs. My reflection in the window was pale, hollow-eyed, older than I remembered. For a moment, I didn't see resolve. I saw defeat, and then my phone rang. I stared at the screen. My granddaughter's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Grandma," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We're worried about you. You've been acting strange. People are talking. Maybe you should let us help. Just sign a few things, make it easier on everyone." I clenched my jaw. "Sign what?" "Oh, nothing big. Just power of attorney. You don't need to stress over bills, accounts, insurance. We'll take care of it." The audacity was staggering. My knuckles whitened around the phone. "You left me in the woods to die," I said quietly. Her silence on the line was deafening. Then, with a cold laugh, "If you remember it that way." The call ended. I stood there in the cabin, shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. They were pushing me into a corner, tightening the net. And for a terrifying moment, I wondered if they would succeed. I sank into the chair, folder pressed to my chest. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break me. The shadows outside pressed closer, the wind howling like a warning. And in that suffocating silence, one thought kept circling, sharp as ice. They're going to take everything. Unless I made the next move first. The night after my granddaughter's call, I couldn't sleep. The fire burned low, shadows stretching across the cabin walls like dark fingers. Every creak of wood sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like someone circling. They thought they had me boxed in. They thought I was cornered. But they had forgotten something important. I had lived a long life, long enough to know people. Long enough to remember debts others had forgotten, and long enough to survive worse storms than a pack of greedy grandchildren. At sunrise, I bundled the folder under my arm and asked Frank for one more ride. "Where to?" he asked. "Courthouse." The county building was squat and gray, snow clinging to its stone steps. Inside, the heat hit like a wall. The air smelled faintly of coffee and dust. I walked past the stairs, cane tapping sharp on the tile. In the records office, I met a clerk I'd known since she was a child. Her name was Sarah. I used to watch her after school while her mother worked double shifts. She blinked in surprise when she saw me. "Mrs. Miller?" "Sarah, dear, I need help pulling property records. My house. My land." Her hands moved quickly, respectful, no questions asked. She slid thick folders across the counter. I flipped through pages, scanning signatures, deeds, contracts, and there it was, a document I had never signed, a transfer draft, my property, my house, listed under my grandson's name, date stamped only 2 weeks earlier. The room tilted. "They tried to file it," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "But it wasn't accepted, missing your notarized signature. Still, if you hadn't caught it..." I closed the folder slowly. My hands steady, though my heart thundered. They had been preparing this for months. Piece by piece, they weren't just draining my accounts. They were trying to erase me entirely. I looked Sarah dead in the eye. "Make me certified copies, every page, and seal them." She nodded quickly. By the time I left, a weight had lifted, replaced with something sharper. I didn't just have suspicion now, I had evidence. Frank drove me back, silent, eyes flicking to me in the rearview mirror. He knew something had shifted. He could feel it. That night, I made my move. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I picked up the phone. My fingers trembled slightly, but my voice was ice when the line connected. "Detective Rowe. Please." Rowe. A name my grandchildren didn't know. A man I hadn't spoken to in years. But I remembered. His daughter used to play softball with my youngest. He had eaten more than a few slices of my apple pie at fundraisers. When his voice finally came through the line, it was older, deeper, but steady as ever. "Joe, it's been a long time." "It has," I said. "And I'm afraid I wouldn't be calling unless it mattered." I told him enough, not everything. The fraud, the withdrawals, the attempted deed transfer. He listened without interrupting. Finally, he said, "I can't promise miracles, but I can promise I'll look, quietly." Quietly. That was the key. I hung up, breath shaky, but lighter. The first seeds were planted, and now it was their turn to sweat. The very next day, the first crack showed. My grandson stormed up to the cabin, pounding the door so hard the walls rattled. Frank tensed, reaching for the handle, but I motioned him back. "Let him shout," I whispered. Through the wood, his voice was venom. "You think you're clever, old woman? You think you can ruin us?" His words spilled hot and fast, curses and threats tangled together, but underneath I heard it. Panic. Finally he screamed, "You're finished, Grandma, finished!" Then silence. Tires screeched. His car tore off into the snow. I leaned back in the chair, heart pounding, but my lips curved into something I hadn't felt in months. A smile. Because that outburst told me everything I needed to know. They were already cracking. That night, Frank shook his head. "You're playing with fire." "I know," I said calmly, staring into the flames. "But fire is all I have left." The next morning, a letter slid under the cabin door. No knock, no footsteps, just an envelope lying in the snow. Inside, a single sheet of paper, my name typed at the top. And below it, in block letters, one chilling sentence: "Drop it or we'll finish what we started." The letter lay on the table all night, its black words glaring up at me every time the fire flickered. "Drop it or we'll finish what we started." Frank wanted to call the sheriff. "This is a threat, plain and simple." But I shook my head. "Not yet. Not until I have everything lined up." Because I knew one thing about bullies. When they start leaving notes, it means they're desperate. They were scared of me now, scared of what I had in my hands. The next morning, Detective Rowe called. His voice was low, measured. "You were right to bring this to me. The transactions, the property transfer, it's enough to open an investigation." I gripped the receiver tighter. "But there's pushback," he admitted. "Your grandchildren are painting you as unstable. They've been talking to neighbors, friends, anyone who will listen. They're saying you're slipping, losing track of reality. If this goes public too soon, it muddies the waters." My throat tightened. Slipping. That same word again. They wanted to cut me down before I even stood up. But Rowe continued. "Don't worry, I've seen this before. We'll need one more piece to shut it down, something undeniable." I glanced at the folder, at the copies Sarah had made. My hand trembled. "Then I'll get it." That day, I made the hardest walk of my life, back to my own house. The snow crunched under my boots, the wind biting at my face. Frank begged to come with me, but I refused. "This is mine to do." The blinds on the house were drawn tight. No sound. My cane tapped against the porch as I forced myself up the steps. My key still fit. The door swung open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the faint odor of smoke that lingered from the shed fire. My furniture was overturned, drawers half open. They had been searching, hunting for what I might have kept. I moved carefully, every board creaking underfoot. Then in the living room, I found it. A stack of mail scattered across the floor. Bills, notices, statements. One envelope torn open, left behind in their rush. I picked it up, and my heart nearly stopped. It wasn't addressed to me. It was a medical statement. For my grandson. Treatment costs. Thousands of dollars. All billed under my insurance. Dates, signatures, codes, clear as day. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen my very identity, my health, my name. I stuffed the paper into my coat and turned toward the door, but froze. A floorboard groaned behind me. I spun, my cane raised like a weapon, and there she was, my granddaughter, standing in the hallway, eyes glittering, lips curled into a smirk. "Well, well," she drawled. "Look who finally crawled back." My grip tightened on the cane. "You've gone too far." She laughed. "Too far. You're the one sneaking into houses that don't belong to you anymore. Did you think no one would notice?" The words hit me like ice. They were already talking about my house as if it wasn't mine. She stepped closer, her voice low, venomous. "You should have just signed the papers, Grandma. Given us what we deserved. Now look at you, hobbling around, clutching at scraps. Pathetic." I didn't answer. I slipped the medical statement deeper into my coat pocket. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't see. Not yet. Instead, she leaned in close, whispering, "Do yourself a favor, drop it, before someone really gets hurt." Then she turned, her laughter echoing through the empty house, and walked out the door. My knees shook. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. But when I reached into my coat and touched the folded statement, I steadied. Because now I had it. The undeniable peace Roe needed. That night, I handed it over to him in the shadows outside the courthouse. His flashlight beam cut across the page, and his jaw tightened. "This is it," he said. "With this, they won't wriggle out. I'll move fast." I nodded, breath fogging in the cold air. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From anticipation, because I knew what was coming next. And as I turned back toward the cabin, snow falling heavier now, I let myself whisper into the night, a promise carried on the wind. They'll regret underestimating me. But as I reached the cabin porch, a chill ran down my spine. The door was ajar. Frank's truck still sat outside, engine cold, but the lights inside the cabin flickered, shadows moving across the walls. Someone was already waiting. The cabin door creaked open wider as I stepped onto the porch, snow crunching beneath my boots. My heart hammered, but my grip on the cane was steady. Inside, the fire still glowed, but the warmth felt wrong. Too still, too staged. Then a voice slithered out of the shadows. "Thought you could hide from us forever, Grandma." My grandson emerged from the corner, his smirk stretched thin, jittery. Behind him, my granddaughter leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her eyes sharp with satisfaction. Frank sat in the chair by the hearth, hands tied behind his back, a bruise already blooming across his cheek. My stomach turned, but my face stayed cold. "So this is what you've become." "No," my grandson sneered. "This is what you made us. You held everything back, hoarded it, kept us struggling while you sat on piles of money. We just evened the score." I almost laughed. Piles of money? If only they'd known how many nights I'd gone without heat, how many meals I'd stretched into 3. But I stayed silent. He stepped closer, his breath sour, his eyes wild. "Drop whatever you're doing. End it, or next time you won't crawl away from the woods." I met his stare, unflinching. "You should have checked your accounts before you came here." He blinked. "What?" My lips curled into the faintest smile. "They're empty, frozen. You've got nothing left." For a moment, the fire popped loudly in the silence. My granddaughter's eyes flickered. My grandson's face flushed red. "You're lying," he spat. "Am I?" I tilted my head. "Why don't you call the bank?" His phone was already in his hand. He dialed, pacing, muttering under his breath. Then he froze. The blood drained from his face. They said the accounts are under investigation." I leaned heavily on my cane, my voice sharp as a blade. "Investigation. That's the word you should remember." My granddaughter lunged at me then, face twisted with rage. But the cabin door burst open before she could touch me. 2 officers stormed in, Detective Rowe right behind them. His flashlight cut across the room, freezing the scene in a harsh white glare. "Step back," Rowe barked. My grandchildren's bravado melted in an instant. My grandson stumbled. My granddaughter's jaw trembled. Rowe strode forward, holding up the sealed documents. "We have enough. Fraud, insurance theft, attempted deed transfer. And now?" He gestured to Frank, tied to the chair. "Kidnapping." The room spun with shouting, handcuffs clinking, protests screeching. "Lies!" my granddaughter screamed. "She's crazy. She's making all this up." Rowe didn't even look at her. He turned to me, his voice calm. "Don't worry, Joe. This part's over." But as they dragged my grandchildren out into the snow, screaming and thrashing, I felt no victory, only a hollow ache. They had once sat at my table, sticky with jam, their hands small in mine. I had sung them to sleep, mended their torn clothes, kissed their scraped knees, and now they looked back at me with nothing but hate. Frank rubbed his wrists free once the officers untied him. You did it, he said quietly. I shook my head. No, they did this to themselves. I just gave them the rope. The fire hissed as a log collapsed into ash. The sound was too close, too familiar. It reminded me of the shed, of the crackle of flames devouring memories. Roe returned a few hours later, after the chaos had settled. He handed me a folded envelope. These are the certified documents. The house, the accounts, they're secure now. In your name. No one can touch them. I nodded, but my fingers trembled as I tucked the envelope away. Thank you, I said softly. He studied me for a moment. You know, they'll be gone a long time, but folks will talk. Some will say you went too far, others will say you didn't go far enough. I met his gaze. Let them talk. When he left, silence filled the cabin again. Frank dozed in the chair, exhausted. Snow tapped against the windows, steady and endless. I stared into the fire until dawn. I had won. On paper, in court, in truth, but the victory tasted bitter, ash in my mouth, because as much as I hated them, I couldn't erase the image of their faces when the handcuffs closed. Not the arrogance, not the rage, but the flicker of fear. Fear I had put there. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all. Revenge hadn't given me peace. It had only given me silence. As the first light of morning spilled across the floor, I whispered to myself, barely audible over the crackling fire. They thought I'd die forgotten. Instead, I outlived them. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the last thing I hadn't shown anyone, not even Roe. Another medical bill. Different name. Different date. Someone else they had used my identity for. Someone I didn't know. The trap was closed. But the shadows my grandchildren left behind, they were only just beginning to surface.